In the heat of the summer of 1940, as Britain stood alone against the tyranny of Nazi Germany, Winston Churchill found himself at the helm of a nation teetering on the edge of collapse. The brutal fall of France and the subsequent retreat of British forces from the beaches of Dunkirk left the island isolated, vulnerable, and facing overwhelming odds. Yet amid the chaos and despair, there was one force that still held the potential to save Britain: its Royal Navy. This navy, once the undisputed master of the seas, now found itself in a dire struggle for survival. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, the Luftwaffe rained down bombs on British cities, and the Kriegsmarine's surface vessels challenged the British fleet's dominance. The fate of Britain was inextricably tied to the survival of its navy. Without it, the island would be defenseless against the looming threat of invasion. The navy, already stretched thin by the demands of global empire and the war in Europe, faced the daunting task of protecting Britain's shores from the ever-present threat of German assault. But Churchill, ever the strategist, knew that this battle would be won not only by the might of the fleet, but by the courage and resolve of the men who sailed within it. The Prime Minister, ever resolute, refused to bow to despair. He saw this crisis as a moment to galvanize not only the Navy but the entire British nation. His determination became the catalyst that would keep the Royal Navy afloat, even as the world seemed to crumble around them. At Churchill's command, Britain's naval forces underwent a fundamental shift. The looming threat of the German Navy and the powerful Luftwaffe demanded a reorganization of resources, an overhaul of strategies, and an unwavering resolve from the naval leadership. Under Churchill's watchful eye, every available ship, from battleships to small destroyers, was tasked with ensuring the defense of Britain's coasts and supply routes. Yet, even with all the naval might at their disposal, the sheer scale of the enemy's power made it clear that victory would not come easily. Churchill knew that the war would be decided not in one battle but in a series of critical engagements that would test Britain's mettle. Despite the many challenges, Churchill's unyielding spirit shone through, as he relentlessly worked to secure the Navy's survival. He demanded constant updates from naval commanders, each report filled with both victories and setbacks. His faith in his Navy never wavered, for he knew that this was not just a military battle but a battle for the soul of Britain. To Churchill, the Royal Navy represented the heart of the British Empire, a symbol of strength, resilience, and the indomitable will of a free people. Even as the German forces closed in, Churchill's voice, over the radio and in the halls of power, remained a constant reminder that Britain would never surrender. But the battle for Britain's navy was not only one of survival. It was a fight for the future of the nation itself. Britain's ability to project power across the globe was inextricably tied to the strength of its fleet. Yet Churchill understood that even the greatest fleet would be powerless without the unwavering support of the British people. Thus, Churchill turned to the Navy's greatest asset, its sailors. With every ship that set out to sea, every destroyer that engaged the enemy, and every convoy that braved the perilous waters, Britain's sailors became the living embodiment of the nation's defiance against Nazi tyranny. Despite the overwhelming odds, Churchill's call to arms rallied the nation. He knew that every sailor, from the highest admiral to the newest recruit, was essential to Britain's survival. And with each passing day, the Royal Navy's resilience proved that it could still hold the line against the might of Germany. Churchill's leadership would prove to be the keystone of this struggle, ensuring that Britain's navy would endure in the face of total annihilation. It was in these dark hours that the seeds of victory would be sown, not just in the steel hulls of warships, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in the unshakable strength of the British spirit. The Atlantic was the lifeblood of Britain's war effort, a vital conduit for supplies, troops, and essential resources. Yet, with the fall of France and the dominance of the German Navy, the shipping lanes had become increasingly treacherous. Germany's U-boats, the deadly submarines that prowled beneath the surface, were wreaking havoc on British merchant convoys, sinking vessels and cutting off critical supplies. Churchill, understanding the gravity of the situation, declared that Britain's survival hinged on maintaining control of the Atlantic. If the U-boats were allowed to starve Britain of its supplies, the island would fall to the enemy. The battle for control of the Atlantic was a brutal and ongoing struggle. The Royal Navy's surface vessels, though formidable, were not designed to counter the stealthy menace of the U-boat. The Germans, using their advanced submarine technology and the tactics of wolf packs, hunted British convoys with deadly efficiency. It was during this dark period that Churchill's leadership proved indispensable. He became the champion of the Royal Navy's efforts to combat the growing U-boat threat, tirelessly advocating for new technologies, tactics, and strategies that would turn the tide of the war beneath the waves. One of Churchill's first major decisions was to prioritize the development of anti-submarine warfare tactics. The Royal Navy, in collaboration with scientists and engineers, began to experiment with new technologies that could detect the hidden U-boats before they could strike. Depth charges, sonar, and later radar became the Navy's weapons in the fight against the silent killers of the deep. Yet the battle was not just one of technology but also of human resolve. British sailors, day after day, sailed into waters that were thick with the danger of sudden attack. But their courage and determination, fueled by Churchill's unrelenting faith in their mission, kept them steadfast in the face of mounting losses. Churchill, deeply aware of the stakes, ensured that every aspect of Britain's war effort was focused on defeating the U-boat menace. New tactics were developed, such as the use of convoys escorted by warships, ensuring that merchant vessels were protected as they made their perilous journeys across the Atlantic. This strategy, while not foolproof, became one of the key components of Britain's survival. But Churchill knew that Britain could not win this battle alone. He reached out to the United States, forging a critical alliance with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and securing vital resources, including American warships, which would help patrol the seas. Despite the advances in technology and strategy, the battle against the U-boats would continue to be a costly one. The Germans, undeterred, ramped up their efforts, and the Atlantic became a vast, blood-soaked battleground. For every victory that the Royal Navy scored, the enemy retaliated with more deadly attacks. The Battle of the Atlantic, as it became known, would rage for the entire length of the war, with neither side willing to give an inch. Churchill, however, never wavered in his resolve. He knew that the survival of Britain depended on this battle, and he rallied his commanders to press on, no matter the cost. The toll on Britain's sailors was immense. The risks of war on the high seas were matched only by the bravery of those who faced them. It was not uncommon for a single convoy to lose multiple ships, and the losses were often staggering. Yet, even in the face of despair, Churchill's unwavering belief in the Royal Navy's ability to endure became a beacon for the men who sailed the oceans. The battle for control of the Atlantic was not just about ships and submarines, it was a battle of wills, a test of resilience that would ultimately define the future of the war. Churchill's leadership during this critical period ensured that the Royal Navy never faltered, even as the cost of victory seemed unbearable. His support for the Navy's efforts to secure the Atlantic supply lines became a key factor in keeping Britain alive. And though the U-boats continued to threaten Britain's survival, Churchill's faith in the Navy's ability to overcome the odds ensured that Britain's war effort could continue, slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. While the Royal Navy battled the U-boats in the Atlantic, the skies above Britain were being relentlessly pummeled by the Luftwaffe. The Battle of Britain, as it became known, saw waves of German bombers attacking British cities and military targets, hoping to break the will of the British people. Churchill understood that the Navy's role in this air war was just as critical as its role in the Battle of the Atlantic. The Navy's Coastal Command, operating from airfields along the coast, launched continuous sorties against German air bases, trying to disrupt the Luftwaffe's operations. Churchill was well aware that Britain's survival depended not only on the Navy's ability to hold the line in the Atlantic but also on the survival of the Royal Air Force. The threat of invasion was ever present, and the Navy's role in supporting the RAF was vital. Churchill's strategic foresight led him to push for an integrated approach to warfare, one that saw the Navy, Army, and Air Force working together to combat the German threat from all angles. Britain's naval commanders were ordered to coordinate their efforts with the RAF, sharing intelligence, resources, and strategies to ensure the defense of the island. This collaboration paid off in unexpected ways. The Navy's reconnaissance aircraft played a pivotal role in spotting German bombers before they could reach their targets. In turn, the RAF's fighters would protect naval convoys and target German ships attempting to disrupt Britain's maritime trade. Churchill's insistence on cooperation between the armed forces ensured that Britain's defenses were unified and effective, despite the ongoing onslaught from the Luftwaffe. By the winter of 1940, the Royal Navy was stretched to its limits. Despite its successes, the relentless pressure from Germany had begun to take its toll. The Navy needed reinforcements, new ships, and more men to keep pace with the demands of the war. Churchill's response was decisive. He allocated resources to shipyards, ordering the construction of new warships and the repair of existing ones. The supply of ammunition and fuel was prioritized, and Britain's naval commanders worked tirelessly to keep their fleets operational. But Churchill knew that these efforts alone wouldn't be enough. The morale of the Navy was just as important as the number of ships it possessed. Churchill personally visited naval bases across Britain, meeting with sailors and commanders alike, to ensure that they knew how much they were valued. His presence was a powerful motivator. It reminded the men that their prime minister, their leader, was with them in the fight. His commitment to the Navy's survival was unshakable, and his message to the sailors was clear: Britain's survival rested on their shoulders. Despite the hardships, the Navy's men pressed on, drawing strength from their leader's unwavering faith in their abilities. As the war progressed into 1941, the importance of Britain's Navy only grew. With the threat of invasion still looming, Churchill's leadership ensured that the fleet remained a symbol of defiance. Through his actions, Britain's Navy, though battered and bruised, remained unbroken. And with each passing day, the Navy's resolve grew stronger, just as Churchill had always known it would. The Mediterranean, once a strategic asset for Britain, had become a vulnerable theater of war by the end of 1940. German forces had invaded Greece and pushed through North Africa, threatening to cut off Britain's access to vital supply routes. The Mediterranean was critical not only for maintaining communication with the British colonies in Africa and Asia but also for protecting the Suez Canal, a vital link to the oil supplies of the Middle East. Churchill recognized that losing control of the Mediterranean would have catastrophic consequences. Therefore, he dedicated a significant portion of Britain's naval resources to combating the growing threat in this region. The Royal Navy faced significant challenges in the Mediterranean. The German forces, aided by Italian naval assets, were formidable adversaries. Yet, Churchill's resolve was unyielding. Under his leadership, the British Mediterranean Fleet launched a series of critical operations aimed at disrupting the Axis forces' supply lines and undermining their strategic advantage. These operations were marked by courage, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to Britain's survival. One of the key battles in this campaign was the Battle of Taranto, a daring air raid launched by the Royal Navy against the Italian fleet. The success of the raid, though costly, demonstrated the adaptability and resilience of Britain's naval forces. It was a victory that bolstered the morale of the British people and sent a clear message to the Axis powers: Britain would not surrender. The Battle of Taranto was followed by several other naval victories in the Mediterranean, as British forces fought to maintain control of the region. Churchill's leadership during these operations was crucial. He kept close tabs on every movement in the Mediterranean, personally communicating with naval commanders and offering strategic insights. His ability to see the bigger picture and his unwavering belief in the Navy's ability to prevail kept Britain's forces in the fight. Under his direction, the Royal Navy would continue to challenge the Axis forces in the Mediterranean, keeping vital supply routes open and preventing the fall of the region. As 1941 wore on, the strategic landscape began to shift. The United States, which had remained neutral, began to provide critical support to Britain in the form of supplies, warships, and aircraft. The Lend-Lease program, signed in March 1941, ensured that Britain would not have to face Germany alone. With the influx of American resources, Churchill's vision of a renewed naval strength began to materialize. The turning point in the war, however, came with the Battle of the Atlantic, where Britain's naval forces, aided by new technologies and reinforced by American assistance, began to turn the tide against the German U-boats. The Royal Navy's ability to maintain control of the seas was increasingly secure, and as German efforts to starve Britain of supplies faltered, so too did their ambitions. Churchill's unwavering focus on the Navy's survival, bolstered by his deep belief in Britain's resilience, ensured that the Royal Navy could continue its role as the guardian of Britain's shores. By 1944, the war had reached a pivotal moment. The Allied invasion of Normandy, codenamed Operation Overlord, was imminent. Churchill understood the strategic importance of this operation and how vital the Royal Navy's role would be in ensuring its success. The Navy would provide critical support for the amphibious assault, protecting the landing forces and ensuring that the beaches of Normandy were secure from both German air and naval attacks. Churchill's leadership and foresight were instrumental in organizing this operation. The Royal Navy, bolstered by British, American, and Canadian forces, prepared to launch one of the most ambitious amphibious operations in history. Despite the many challenges and risks, Churchill remained resolute in his belief that the Royal Navy's involvement would be decisive. The success of Operation Overlord would mark the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. As the war neared its conclusion, Churchill's unwavering support for the Royal Navy was vindicated. The Navy had not only survived but had thrived. Despite the constant threat of invasion, the ongoing U-boat campaign, and the challenges of maintaining control of the Mediterranean, Britain's Navy had proved itself to be a decisive force in the war. The sacrifices made by the sailors, the commanders, and the engineers who had kept the fleet operational under impossible conditions ensured that Britain would not only survive but emerge victorious. In the end, Churchill's leadership, his unshakable faith in Britain's navy, had been the cornerstone of the nation's defense. Without the navy, Britain's ability to resist Nazi Germany would have been in serious jeopardy. The victory at sea, coupled with the relentless determination of Churchill's leadership, was a defining moment in Britain's history, securing the island's place in the eventual Allied triumph over fascism. The Royal Navy, though battered, had come through the storm stronger than ever, a symbol of Britain's resilience and Churchill's unparalleled leadership. By 1942, the Mediterranean had become one of the most contested theaters of the war. The Axis powers, led by Germany and Italy, sought to control this vital sea, not only for its strategic location but also for the supply routes that ran through it. For Britain, the Mediterranean was the artery that connected the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa to the Suez Canal, and its survival depended on maintaining control. Yet, it was clear that without the Royal Navy's ability to defend this region, Britain's empire and its future would be under severe threat. Churchill understood that this was no mere naval operation. It was the linchpin of the war effort in North Africa and beyond. With the German Afrika Korps advancing through Libya and pushing toward Egypt, Britain's position in North Africa became increasingly precarious. The Royal Navy, still reeling from earlier losses and stretched thin across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean, found itself engaged in constant battle against the Axis' formidable naval forces. It was in this context that Churchill made the critical decision to bolster the Royal Navy's presence in the Mediterranean. As British forces faced off against the might of Rommel's tanks in the desert, the Navy would be equally crucial in ensuring that British forces remained supplied, able to retreat if necessary, and most importantly, not isolated. One of the pivotal moments in this ongoing struggle was the First Battle of El Alamein in the summer of 1942. While General Bernard Montgomery's forces halted Rommel's advance, it was the Mediterranean Navy that enabled Britain to continue feeding and supporting its ground forces. The shipping lanes remained open despite the constant threat of air attacks and German U-boats. Churchill's commitment to reinforcing Britain's Mediterranean fleet paid dividends. The Navy's ability to secure critical convoys of supplies, food, and ammunition ensured that the British Army could sustain itself in North Africa long enough to shift the balance of power. However, the struggle for supremacy in the Mediterranean was not one that could be won solely by conventional warfare. The region became a battle of attrition, with every ship, every convoy, and every naval engagement contributing to the larger strategic picture. The German and Italian fleets, despite their numerical superiority, could not maintain a sustained blockade of the Mediterranean. Churchill, with his unparalleled strategic mind, knew that time and patience would eventually tip the scales in Britain's favor. As 1943 approached, the British Navy, bolstered by American support through Lend-Lease, turned the tide in the Mediterranean. The Royal Navy's ability to sink enemy vessels, protect convoys and keep supply lines open, combined with the success of British ground forces in North Africa, meant that the Axis powers were slowly losing their grip on the region. By the summer of 1943, the Allies had successfully pushed Axis forces out of Tunisia, and with it, Britain had secured one of the most crucial theaters of the war. Churchill's foresight and determination had ensured that Britain's naval power was not just preserved but was a decisive factor in securing victory. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 marked a pivotal moment not only for the Allied forces but for Britain's survival. For Churchill, the partnership with the United States represented an opportunity to secure the strength of the Royal Navy and bolster Britain's defense against Germany. The Lend-Lease Act, passed in March 1941, saw a surge of American military aid, ships, weapons, aircraft, and equipment, flowing to Britain. Churchill, ever pragmatic, knew that while the Royal Navy remained at the forefront of Britain's defense, American industrial might could help fill the gaps in naval resources and technology. By mid-1942, the influx of American warships, particularly destroyers, helped to alleviate the mounting pressure on the Royal Navy. American shipbuilding capabilities ensured that the Navy could replace its losses and maintain a formidable fleet. As U-boats continued to ravage the Atlantic, American-built destroyers and escorts were integrated into Britain's convoys, providing the necessary protection against Germany's submarine menace. Yet, the relationship between Britain and the United States went beyond mere supplies. Churchill and Roosevelt forged a strong personal bond, one that would be crucial in the coordination of military efforts. The two men shared a vision of defeating Germany and the Axis powers, and their combined strategic planning proved invaluable. American naval and air forces, in tandem with British assets, formed the backbone of the war effort in the Atlantic. The ability to protect convoys, launch counterattacks against U-boats, and eventually initiate amphibious operations on the European continent would not have been possible without the close cooperation between the Royal Navy and the United States. By 1943, the Royal Navy's strategic reach had expanded dramatically. With American support, the Navy not only secured Britain's maritime borders but also began launching offensive operations against German-occupied Europe. The collaboration of British and American naval forces ensured that the Allied side maintained the initiative, pushing German forces back and reclaiming lost territories. Churchill, always focused on the big picture, saw the U.S. involvement as essential to the ultimate defeat of the Axis. The Navy's newfound strength, amplified by American resources, was crucial in ensuring that Britain could hold its own in every theater of the war. The invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day on June 6, 1944, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. For Churchill, this operation represented the culmination of years of strategy, deception, and sacrifice. But behind every wave of soldiers landing on the beaches of Normandy was the unwavering support of the Royal Navy, which would provide the necessary firepower, transportation, and logistical support to ensure the success of the Allied invasion. It was here that Churchill's vision for the Navy's role in the war would come to full fruition. The Navy's contribution to the D-Day landings was nothing short of extraordinary. British warships, along with their American counterparts, provided naval gunfire support, bombarding German defenses along the coast before the first wave of soldiers even set foot on the beach. In addition, the Navy was responsible for transporting thousands of soldiers across the English Channel, ensuring that they reached their objectives. The sheer scale of this operation was immense, requiring thousands of ships to participate, including landing crafts, minesweepers, and heavy battleships. Churchill, recognizing the complexity and significance of the operation, was personally involved in the planning. His insistence on meticulous detail and his ability to keep the Allied forces coordinated were key to the success of the landings. The Royal Navy, despite the threats posed by German submarines and aircraft, played a central role in making D-Day a reality. Their ability to maintain control of the channel and provide fire support allowed the ground forces to secure the beaches and establish a foothold in France. Without the Navy's contribution, the invasion could have been doomed to failure. The success of D-Day marked a turning point in the war. The Allies, having secured a stronghold in Western Europe, began their advance toward Germany. But it was the Royal Navy's pivotal role in ensuring the success of the landings that cemented its place in history. Churchill's vision of a navy that could secure victory on the seas and support operations on land had been realized. The invasion of Normandy was the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe, and the Navy's support ensured that the Allied forces could carry the fight to Nazi Germany's doorstep. While the Royal Navy played a decisive role in Europe, Churchill's commitment to the Navy's global presence was equally evident in the Pacific. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the conflict in the Pacific became a major front in the war. Churchill, ever the strategist, recognized the need for a strong naval presence in the Pacific to counter Japan's expansion. British naval forces, alongside those of the United States, engaged in key battles to reclaim territory and maintain pressure on Japan. In the early stages of the Pacific War, British naval forces were stretched thin. The loss of several key bases, particularly in the Far East, had left Britain vulnerable. Yet Churchill's leadership ensured that the Royal Navy's role in the Pacific would remain significant. The Navy participated in numerous naval engagements, including the Battle of the Coral Sea and the subsequent Battle of Midway, alongside American forces. These battles marked the beginning of the end for Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. Churchill's support for the Navy in these operations helped to secure critical victories and ensure that Japan's expansion was halted. As the war in Europe wound down in 1945, Churchill turned his attention to the final stages of the Pacific conflict. The Royal Navy, having proved itself in countless engagements, continued to support Allied operations as the final assault on Japan loomed. Churchill, aware of the pivotal role the Navy had played in the defeat of the Axis powers, sought to ensure its place in the post-war world. He pushed for a strong naval presence, knowing that Britain's security would depend on maintaining its maritime dominance. The Navy's legacy, shaped by Churchill's leadership and unwavering resolve, was one of endurance and triumph. The Royal Navy had not only survived the darkest days of the war but had emerged as a key factor in the eventual Allied victory. Its legacy would live on, not only in the battles fought during the war but in the spirit of the men who served within it. While the Navy's role in Britain's victory was undeniable, it came at a tremendous cost. Thousands of sailors lost their lives, many aboard ships that were sunk by enemy fire or torpedoes. The toll on Britain's naval personnel was staggering, but their sacrifice ensured that the Royal Navy would endure and emerge victorious. Churchill, always conscious of the human cost of war, recognized that it was not just ships and equipment that had won the war, it was the men and women who had given everything to secure Britain's future. The war had changed the Royal Navy forever. Its ships, once symbols of unchallenged power, had been tested in the most brutal of environments. But its resilience had proved that even in the darkest of times, Britain's navy could rise to the occasion. The sacrifices made by its sailors would never be forgotten. Churchill's leadership had ensured that the navy remained a force to be reckoned with, and its legacy would continue to shape Britain's naval power for decades to come. As peace settled over Europe in 1945, Britain faced the daunting task of rebuilding its shattered infrastructure and economy. The Royal Navy, though exhausted from years of warfare, stood ready to serve in the post-war world. Churchill's leadership had transformed the Navy into a symbol of Britain's resilience and determination. The Navy's role in securing victory had been crucial, and it would continue to serve as the cornerstone of Britain's defense for years to come. Britain, though weary, had emerged victorious. Churchill's unwavering belief in the Royal Navy, and his ability to rally the nation around its cause, ensured that Britain would not only survive but would thrive in the post-war world. The legacy of the Navy, shaped by its critical role in Britain's victory, would continue to inspire future generations. And Churchill, having led Britain through its darkest hours, would go down in history as the man who saved not only the Navy but the nation itself.